Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Human SOS show. Appreciate you being here with us today. We got having some little bit of technical difficulty, so you'll only have my mug to look at. Anton is here in voice only for the moment, and so we'll move forward. And we're going to talk today about the effects of fear on us, and not focused on when we encounter um, difficult or challenging situations. We're talking about the pervasive fear that we get into. So, Anton, you want to give us a little background on that?
Absolutely. I apologize. My camera is not working. I keep trying to turn it on. It just goes to a black screen. But I'm on vacation, so that's why I don't have a normal tech setup. But I still wanted to come and chat with everybody. Um, I won't be able to see the comments, but Kev will pop them up. But talking about chronic fear, right? It's living in a state of fear, which is still interpreted as a state of stress. It's constantly being I look at it as a lion constantly chasing you. You're afraid of being caught by that lion. So think about your body being stressed out in the same way. The impacts show up in many different ways. They show up in our relationships. They show up in our all different aspects of life. They show up at work. They show up in our health. In all different types of ways. So it's coming back to the concept of even if that fear is not something massive, right? Sometimes that fear may be losing a loved one because they're sick and they're dealing with an illness. Sometimes it may be fear of going bankrupt because you just lost your job. These are really big fears. But I'm talking about even when we have small fears, something that preoccupies our mind on a daily basis. We've dealt with COVID, for example, for a really long time. And even when we deal with very small fears, but for extended period of time, where our body doesn't come up for air and get a breath of recovery, it stays in that chronic state. That's when we can see the same side effects, the same issues as we do from these massive fears that can happen of fear of loss of income, household, health, whatever it may be.
All right. Good morning, Rick. Glad to have you with us. I appreciate you joining us. And uh, Anton, can you go into a bit of some of the physiologic components in our bodies going on when we're dealing with fear? I know they're very similar to stress, but if you could maybe break that down a little bit for everyone.
Absolutely. I mean, this is how I always think about prehistorically, right? When our bodies are designed to just survive, simply survive and be, we're looking, coming back to that analogy of a lion chasing us. What's happening? Our body is going to create things like take our blood and drive it away from digestion, which is usually best when we're recovering. And it's going to drive it towards things like extremities, right? Think about your body trying to push blood towards performance based things so you can get away from whatever the threat is in front of you. Whether that fear is materialized in reality or that fear is just mental, the same thing is going to occur in our body chemically. So, what that's going to do is it's going to make our digestion go down. You start having things like ulcers and all these kind of problems, but we don't connect that very often to just a simple concept of living in fear, as, for example, one of those signs. I would be curious to see statistics on gastrointestinal health and how that's been happening over the last 2 years. I would bet that we're seeing a decline in it, and you may be experiencing it personally because we've been living in a state of fear created by media, right? When you turn on the news, it's all that it seems like these days is just there's constant state of fear. Somebody's trying to scare us of something bad happening, something horrible going on because it gets attention, but at the same time, it creates these physiological effects on us. The other one that's going to be poor is going to be our blood sugar regulation, our ability to kind of maintain an even keel energy level throughout the day, because that's what blood sugar regulation does. We're going to have big ups, big downs, big highs, big lows. Our heart rate will be impacted, right? Because our body's going to be working in that go state all the time because it's thinking it needs to survive and get away from it. our mind is going to be impacted because we're constantly living in this prehistoric mind. The lizard brain, as me and Kevin often talk about, and that makes it difficult for our body to be logical and responsive. Instead, it's reactive. So those are just some things that happen.
And Anton, correct me if I'm wrong, but your body, in dealing with fear because of the adrenaline effect, isn't that the same that happens that causes cholesterol to be produced in our system, that can therefore, if we're living in constant fear, even drive our cholesterol up?
Well, absolutely, it can cause the cholesterol to go up. It causes our cortisol go up. It causes our sleep to go down. With cholesterol, a lot of people talk about cholesterol as coming from saturated fats and things like that, which that is partly true, but it has actually a lot to do with like carbohydrates and things like that. And the reason that happens is more in an indirect pathway. When we are in a state of fear, it's, as you said already, we're very similar to a state of stress. So our body's looking for simple and fast energy all the time. So what it'll make us do is crave either comfort foods, sweets, highly carbohydrate, high carbohydrate foods, and also highly processed foods. And all of those things are going to cause us to start build up plaque in our arteries and elevate our cholesterol. It'll cause us to gain weight, which in turn puts more lipids in our bloodstream and creates, once again, more cholesterol. So you're absolutely correct. But honestly, I think state of fear, the biggest one that we constantly deal with today is sleep. I think that's the number one symptom of being in a chronic state of fear is you start to have issues falling asleep. That's usually how it shows up in the beginning is you lay down, and I'm going to tell you folks right now that are listening, you're supposed to fall asleep within 5 minutes. Like lay down, put your head on a pillow, within 5 minutes you're out. But many of us have to wind down, have our phones for a while, we have to watch something, we have to read. And some of us just simply lay there for 30 minutes until our mind finally winds down. We're able to go to sleep. That's because when we're in a state of fear, our cortisol, our stress response hormone, goes up, and it has an inverse relationship with melatonin, which allows us to kind of fall asleep and stay asleep at night. So when we're entering nighttime with an elevated level of cortisol, our body can't have enough melatonin to go to sleep.
Very, very interesting. Welcome, Jeffrey. Glad to have you. It's been a while. Glad to see you joining us today. And and Anton, yesterday I talked about fear, especially related to pandemic, and how that it is being pushed on us especially through media. And so I'm glad we're talking about the differing effects on us physiologically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And I hope we can offer some things. Yesterday, we talked about maybe ways to get better perspective on the fears. And then hopefully we can maybe talk about some physiological and mental emotional steps we can take to protect ourselves. One of the things that is important to note is that we aren't designed to live with constant fear. We're designed when something is wrong to have a very healthy response to fears, and your body equips itself to respond to those, and that's great. The challenge is that we were never intended to just live with that as an elevated position. Our normal state should be. I don't like the term fearless, because anyone that doesn't allow for fear in their life is just asking for trouble. But fear should be that fight or flight, or as going back to our earlier days where we were subject to being exposed to animals that will harm us and so on. The ability to react and respond to that is what is the healthier fears. and that's normal. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what I've kind of come to term as pervasive fear. It's all around us and affecting everything that we do. Hello, Zaid. Glad to have you. Appreciate you being here as well. So, from a spiritual standpoint, because we believe that we've got to be balanced in our whole being to be healthy. From a spiritual standpoint, uh, many of the uh, spiritual religious constructs talk about not having fear. And in fact, for those of you that uh, consider the Bible a good source, I believe it is not being anxious, not being fearful is mentioned 365 times. So it's one time for each day, even. And that's uh, the how important it is not to live in that fear. And so when we are living in fear, it affects us spiritually in that it will hinder us in our prayers, our meditations, things like that, that are part of keeping us healthy. So, on that score, one of the ways to, if you will, answer um, fears spiritually is through prayer and meditation, and also talking with like-minded spiritual people to get the a peer, spiritual perspective for ourselves as well, because again that factors into how we process this fear. Any thoughts on that, Anton?
Well, it's kind of your comment first about media. I'm not a conspiracy theorist per se, but if we look historically, and history repeats itself over and over and over, as as a student of history yourself,
Yeah.
The media has been used to control population for many, many years, whether that media was written word, spoken word, fully visualized word. And we're naive to think that this constant fear mongering is not being a distraction for us. It's very easy to let people do, to control people in reality when you divide them into two opposing opinions and you make everything beyond extremes and you put people into the state of fear. But why are people doing it? Why is this happening in our society? It has to do with our brain. It has everything to do with our brain. As I mentioned earlier, when we're in that state of fear, we are in reactive survival
Mhm.
mode. We are not in our conscious, logical, processing, proactive mode. So it's very easy to make us think a certain way, make us respond a certain way, and it's very easy to predict how we're going to respond to certain things. So to combat that, we have to find ways to get out of this survival mode and calm our limbic system, calm that primitive brain that sits at the root of our spine and the bottom of our head, and allow signals to travel, neurons to wake up in our prefrontal cortex where we're logical. Well, how do we do that? We have to breathe. We have to become present in the current moment. Whatever your form of mindfulness, we talked about this, I think, last week, and we've talked about it many, many times before. Whatever is your form of mindfulness, whether it be
Mm.
spiritual prayer, whether it be meditation, whatever allows you to disconnect from the world around you and become fully present in the moment. That's what we need to do. That's what we have to do. But guess what? If you're glued to the television all the time and you're watching the news nonstop, that's not going to happen. It's simply impossible. You have to turn off the TV, you have to turn off the noise, and you have to become present in the moment. And it's funny, like it's anxiety treatment when people are having an anxiety episode, which is basically a form of fear. We're overcome with that fear of the future and we're anxious about it. People have you, engage your senses. They want you to smell something. They want you to touch something. They want you to try to listen for something that's happening in that current moment. So when you're overcome with fear, that's a tool that you can use just the same way. And then that logic can kick in. And then we go, okay, is this fear real? Right? Or as you say, Kevin, all the time, a lizard being perceived as a dragon.
Mm,
where that may be the reality, but living this constant state of fear does this to us all the time.
yeah. And for those of you that are just joining, Anton is having some technical difficulty, but it's worth it because he's getting to have some vacation time. And so that's why he's just with us on audio. He's not in his normal technological digs, if you will. So just make you aware of that. And as you were talking about the effects of the media and how it drives us. I think back to when 9/11 occurred, and you were talking about how that it causes us to polarize and so on. I think I remember vividly that in that particular case, it it I think it does back up. It doesn't always have to cause us to polarize. Sometimes it will cause us to come together in a unified situation, which is in real fearful situations. That is the optimum case because then we are coming together and have a sense of security around it, like we did in 9/11 when after that happened there were no subgroups, there were no um, divisions. We were all Americans and we had all been attacked and we responded and we came together. And unfortunately, that same drive that we have that is natural is now causing division and causing us harm. Let's see, Rick has a comment. Rick says, I turned off the news for the most part about a year ago. That's a good choice in my mind, Rick, because these days it is the news is not about informing us. It is about causing effect on our opinions and driving our mindset. So I think that's a great way to turn off the noise, if you will, and just disconnect from it. In fact, Anton, isn't what you described also at times, don't they use sensory deprivation as part of working through some of those issues?
Absolutely. I mean, we need a reset for the brain, and sensory deprivation is, we turn off. It's a flotation tank. I do this all the time personally for my own health, and allow my body a reset. It's getting into what it looks like is they have these like flotation tanks, and they're filled with about 1,000 pounds of Epsom salt, and a size something that's a little bit bigger than a bathtub, and maybe only about a foot and a half of water deep. But because there's so much salt in there and so much magnesium, our body floats. So we don't actually touch anything. It's a very weird sensation because you could spend an hour to 90 minutes in those things. And you get to a point where you're like, I feel like I'm just suspended in air and floating because you don't move, you don't hear anything, you don't see anything. And it really helps the brain to reset. A lot of these dopamine signals. So I'm not going to get too sciencey, but tying this into the news aspect, right? Not all news is ill-intentioned, right?
Right.
With intention, like it often becomes bad outcomes without ill intention. Why? Because of sensationalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
People want ratings. That's what news wants first and foremost. And if we don't believe that, I think we're all naive. We don't understand how the media works. Ratings from viewership is what's all about. That's how they make their money. That's how the commercials are going to pay them. That's how everybody's going to, the news stations stay alive and prosper. Well, the thing about sensationalism that constantly comes from it is it burns out a chemical called dopamine in our brain. And dopamine is a motivation hormone, but it plays or a neurotransmitter, but it plays a bunch of different things in our body. Well, what we do is when we do these deprivation tanks, we reset those receptors. We help to kind of clear some of the noise in our heads. We help to just kind of hit a big reset button. And if we do it regularly, it can actually restore us pretty quickly. But that's not always necessary. It's kind of like meditation, just on steroids. The best way I can
Yeah.
say it is that's what it is. You can accomplish it through regular meditation, or you can do a flotation tank, once or twice a week and get a quick reset within a month. But yeah, we have to pay attention to how much excitement our brain has. And right now, we're overly excited in so many different ways.
Yeah, and and with the advent of social media and the web and everything, uh, the the inputs and the stimulations are even more so all around us, which compounds the problem. Definitely. Zaid has a comment. He says, "Fear in its presence in our body is a natural mechanism. By design, it's there to help us. The problem is." When the mechanism goes uncontrolled and takes over. Definitely, Zaid, that is a factor. And welcome, Sharon. Glad to have you with us, and glad you figured out that Anton's the man behind the circle there. Definitely. And Zaid has a question. It says, "Should we turn off the news and be ignorant of what's going on around us, or should we control our consumption of the news and content to be at least aware of the issues around us?" Good question, Zaid. Excuse me. um, and what I would offer is that given the differing sources for information available to us now that can help us stay informed without causing us to be inundated, I find that going to live news and the like is unnecessary. And in fact, having that as a resource or using it as a resource has caused us to be lazy to the point that we don't go and find out information and process it um, uh, well for ourselves. Rather, we are getting inundated and our opinions affected, even if not shaped by constant exposure. So I am for being well informed. Anybody that is around me watches what I say. I encourage people to be well informed, just not by other people's opinions, but by good information and process it that way. Anton, is there, because I know this is your uh, realm more than mine, but is there any um, effects of just hearing information versus truly processing it between conscious and subconscious?
Well, just what I'd like people to do, if you really want to take a look at this, look at how the news has changed, the way that it's delivered over the last, 20, 30 years. News used to be a lot more detailed. It used to be a lot more, you had longer segments, meaning each piece of news had more things to it. So you actually broke it down and you discussed it. And now it's like these rapid fire tidbits of information, and that in itself is just overwhelming. It is overwhelming for our brain. So to Zaid's point, no, we don't have to, stick our hand in the sand and pretend like nothing's going on around us. But we have to be conscious of how we're taking on that content and how it's being delivered. Mix it up, read, to pick up a newspaper. I know those things are still around. Maybe read articles online, but even screen exposure time is still stressful, right? So think about, like, many of us get news feeds from our social media. I think
Mm,
that is the worst way of doing it, to be honest
right.
with you. I think just sitting there in the screen with our face right up against our phone, and just piece of news after piece of news after piece of news. But we're not even really reading them. We're diving into headlines only. And each one of those is creating fear. That's usually what a lot of these news headlines are based on. And it's like a hit after hit of dopamine. And what happens is these brain receptors are going, I'm going to dull how much I receive with this dopamine. I'm going to become not as receptive to it. And over time, we need more and more and more of it to elicit the same response. That's why everything's become in these chunk content delivery, whether it be on social media, whether it be in videos, whether it be in news. Everything is short little snips because our attention is so poor. Well, why is our attention so poor? Because we've overexcited our brain and now we can't focus. So the thing that's causing us problems is the thing that's being delivered to us more as a solution to the problem, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, welcome, Juan, from Florida. Glad to have you with us. Uh, Yeah, and I think the common term for that we talk about and we ignore, unfortunately, is desensitization. When we expose ourselves like that, we become desensitized to the point that to elicit a response, then we have to have more of it, and it's a vicious cycle. Am I physiologically correct?
100%. And that goes for so many different things in our body. Um, Anything that creates excitement in our brain impacts this same receptor. But at the same time, excitement can be positive or excitement can be negative from a term of fear. So it all boils down to that. But the similar thing happens with sugar. Like we're being attacked in so many ways. Our brains are really being attacked in so many ways, and that's why we have this show. Honestly, like I just want to show people, like, hey, you got to become more aware of what's happening in your mind, in your body, in your life that is caused by environment around you that is very much controllable. How much exposure we have to news, as we're talking about, is a controllable thing. Nobody
Hmm.
said to completely avoid it, but minimize it to a point where I've got the information I need, and now I don't need to sit here and become overwhelmed by it.
Well, and to that point, welcome, by the way, Shona from the UK. Glad to have you. To that point, it's oh, just lost my train of thought. It's one of those times. Well, let's go to a comment from Jeffrey. He says, "I've been speaking out about the new saying that people stay safe." Um, yeah, Jeffrey, I'm right there with you. It's funny. I didn't really um, pick up on it until recently myself that I am, as part of greeting, that we now say stay safe. And throughout history, to my knowledge, that was not even a thought process because general terms, we felt that we were safe. And now, what's happened in and around the coronavirus and all the pandemic news and everything like that, we have uh, gotten to a point that we're all feeling unsafe. And I, I did a show yesterday talking about some of that. In fact, I'll be doing an additional show this week in the evening for people on different time zones. But the bottom line is that um, we are being driven to feel unsafe all the time. And to a point, I hope I'm not going to offend anybody, but when I observe people driving down the road by themselves in their vehicle with a mask on, I just scratch my head and go, "What are you protecting yourself from?" And yeah, and
Sorry.
in fact, there was a meme that was out recently. A guy standing there, and it was advertising the new mobile safety belt, and he had on a seat belt around him, even though he was not in his car. And it's just that's evidence that what we're talking about is real. And so,
But come
uh,
back to what we just talked about in the beginning, Kev, right? Like our logic goes out the window
yeah,
when we live in a state of fear. We're no longer able to be this amazing human being that we are. We become the much more primitive version of ourselves. And the stay safe comment from Jeffrey. I'd like to ask the world: is the world a much safer place today than it was 50 years ago? It sure is. It
yeah,
is by so many ways, in just about every way, minus maybe technology. But does it feel safer? Maybe outside of World War II and some of these big wars and 9/11, but it feels like we've gotten less safe because of all this fear. But we are so much more safe than we have been in a long time, and it's going to continue to improve. But if we don't change how we communicate, if we don't change allowing people to say stupid stuff like that, I'm sorry, but it is. Stay safe. Like, I understand that it may be a form of care, but we have to understand words have impact. Words have impact on our mind, and if we're constantly being told to stay safe, what is it going to tell us? That the world is not safe. That every time we step foot outside of our house, we are taking a massive risk. That's not a way to live.
and it's the truth of it and factual nature of it's in real question, and that's what's disturbing to me. And I remembered what I was going to mention earlier is I challenge people. Okay, if you really want to test how this affects us, all right, I challenge you to turn off live TV, live radio, different inputs like that, and go without them for 30 days. And the reason I know this is so is we got rid of probably 3 or 4 years ago of using live TV. It was as much a decision about spending too much money on entertainment. And we still have a TV and we still use it for entertainment and some informational purposes. But what I find is really interesting, and I'm not the only one that experiences this, is now if I happen to turn on live TV and I'm inundated with news headlines and commercials, I find myself getting agitated, getting anxious very quickly as a result. In fact, Sharon comments that she can't deal with watching the news all the time. I get too upset. And I'm right there with you. If I turn on live TV, for example, we like to watch, around holidays, like to see, for example, the Macy's parade and things like that. But within about 10 minutes of watching it, boy, I just find myself really becoming agitated and in a state that I am not accustomed to anymore. And as a result, I go, wow, if I'm exposing myself to that all the time, so that means that I am living in a state um, of agitation, anxiety, tension all the time. So, good observation. Let's see here. Rick comments, could the people of the Depression survive with the social media connection we now have? Wow. I think that's a very astute question, Rick. You know, dealing with that kind of trouble at that level is a challenge. And then to be told every day how bad it is, one way or another, is quite, quite demeaning, depressing, a lot of different emotions. So, yeah, that's a good one to think about. And
Well, I mentioned dopamine already, Kev, and I'm going to keep mentioning what is depression. Depression, first and foremost, is a chemical imbalance in the brain. That's what depression is. If people don't have that chemical imbalance, no matter how bad the life is around them, they're not depressed yet. It's staying in that constant state of fear, staying in a constant state of hopelessness. That's what will drive those chemicals. But bringing it back to social media, right? When people spend a lot of time on social media, it creates so much excitement and overload. And I don't mean, remember, excitement doesn't mean necessarily positive or negative. It's just an excited state of the brain. And what that does is it uses up that chemical. It uses up the receptors. And then what it does is it makes us feel low. So what do we want then? We want to feel high again. We want to feel excited again. So what does it cause us to do? Go back to the thing that caused us the problem in the first place. And once again, we're just, the cycle repeats. There's so many examples of this in our everyday life. And I don't know, maybe, we said this, I think, on the show last week, but what is it going to be when we look, in 2060 and we go, I cannot believe we were doing this in 2020. Think about how we feel about smoking right now, right? Smoking cigarettes. It's a dying thing. And go back to 1960s when you had commercials with doctors promoting cigarette use, right? And then different things like that where, oh, it's not bad for you. This is totally fine. I wonder what that thing is going to be in 2060 or 2100, whatever it may be, that we're going to look back and say, I cannot believe we did that. And I think it's going to have something to do with overexposure to content, whatever, to excitement, to all this different stuff, whether it be social media directly, whether it be overall screen time, whether it be, any one of these things. That's my belief. I think that's what it's going to be.
That retrospective is going to be interesting, no doubt. Welcome. We've got a second, Juan Cabrera. Juan Cabrera number 2 is from London. Welcome, Juan. Glad to have you with us. Feel free to jump in and join the conversation. And and Jeffrey makes a follow-on comment to his other one. Every time "stay safe" is mentioned, it reinforces our mind to be afraid. Yeah, if we're having to caution to be safe, that reinforces the concept that we should be fearing all the time and be on the lookout for the boogeyman, so to speak. And yeah, it's a definite indication of challenges that we're facing currently. Um, Zaid makes a comment. Sometimes I do that not because of fear of the infecting the car, but rather forgetting it and have to arrive somewhere and then return back to it. Okay, I can get that. That you would do that to more develop a habit. I understand that. And maybe that's it. And maybe I need to get that perspective. But I guess from someone like myself that rarely, if ever, wears a mask, it's not a need. So I'll adjust my perspective on it and hope that that's what's going on rather than people living with that much fear. And uh, all right, Juan. Well, I appreciate you joining us even while you're in the midst of something else, and I hope that you're able to take away something of value. And Anton, the interesting thing, um, if are we seeing indications of the or symptoms caused by people on a large scale not sleeping well? Because isn't part of the value of sleep is that being completely shut down and our minds still and our senses still for a protracted period of time? But so many people these days are not sleeping well, and as a result, um, a the I'm sorry, I got distracted there for a moment. My oh shiny thing disorder kicked in. Um, but as a result of our not sleeping well, we're not ever recovering, and that's why there is additional need to take additional steps to have that um, reset effect. Is that potential there?
You're spot on, Kev. I mean, honestly, I protect my sleep like probably nobody else. People make fun of me all the time. They're like, Anton, you will literally just stop doing whatever you're doing and like, go home and go to sleep. I'm like, yes, because our body is under so much, I hate we're talking about fear, but I'm gonna make everybody a little bit more afraid by this statement. But our body's under constant attack. Our mind is under constant attack. And the attack is not the problem. Remember, I talked about this, I mentioned this last week, and I've talked about it many times before. It's not the amount of fear, it's not the amount of stress, it's the lack of recovery to match what's coming in. Right? Your body is amazing. Every one of you listening, every one of you watching, everyone in the world, our bodies are the most amazing things that Lord has ever created. Whatever the thing that you believe, I don't care if you believe in God, I don't care if you believe for anything. I don't think anybody can disagree that our body is just simply remarkable, but it needs certain things. It needs recovery. It needs to be able to recharge. Zaid said this about a mechanism, right? Any mechanism cannot just go forever. It has to have recharge. It has to have reset. It has to have repair. And that's when all of that stuff happens, is when we're sleeping. And people are like, well, I don't need 7 to 8 hours. I run on 5 to 6. I'm like, great. You may be functioning. You don't have contrast to how well you could be functioning. You're just getting by. But also, how long can you run like that? I've been in the health and fitness industry for over 12 years now. And trust me, I've seen people that would, I've met with them early on in my career and, spoke to them about many of these things, gave them the advice, and they didn't listen. And then years go by, and a lot of these folks are executives, high-powered companies, and they can't back off. And they came back and they said, Anton, I am depressed. My hormones are crashed out. I'm now overweight. I'm miserable. Why is this happening? Well, I don't want to tell you I told you so, but I told you so. Here's what we can do to fix it. And usually it's lack of sleep that attributes to all of it.
Welcome, Richard. Glad to have you with us. Richard's become one of our regulars. And the interesting thing is, I had always understood that our sleep needs are rather fascinating because my understanding is our body itself can function with a few hours sleep, but the majority of our sleep is for our mind, our brain, and it resting. And that's why we get into the whole conversation about REM sleep and all of that. And so when fears and anxieties disrupt that, then we have a spiraling downward effect. And like Anton says, it's kind of a gradual thing. But down the road, if we're not, especially if we're not intentional and we're not looking and taking time to be introspective, what ends up happening is by the time we discover it, recovery then becomes such a difficult thing. And so, yeah, I think that taking steps to learn how to sleep well is as much for our mental, emotional well-being as it is for our physical. And by the way, I hear or see Zaid commenting that apparently LinkedIn's been having some issues. I know I went through it yesterday on a live stream. I had to join a live stream about 3 or 4 times over it blinking and starting back from the beginning. So y'all aren't alone, and it's not well, it is unusual, but not something to take personally. And then Juan from the UK makes a comment. He says, absolutely agree. Solving sleep disorders is number one. Snoring, apnea, and many other disorders will interfere significantly. Yeah. I think that learning to, as Anton said, guard our sleep, have a definite priority to make sure we're getting that goes a long way to not need to be as intentional about other reset mechanisms. Because right now, the way most of us function, our so-called sleep, even if we're in bed for 7-8 hours, is not having the effect that it should. Is that something you've seen, Anton?
Absolutely. I mean, they have all sorts of sleep trackers these days, and you can see how restless people are when they're sleeping, how little REM sleep they're getting, how little deep sleep they're getting, and that's always impacted. It's interesting because I have mine on. It literally doesn't even come off. I have a like a sunscreen line on my wrist because my tracker never comes off my wrist. But I can see if we're talking about state of fear. If I had a week where I was living in a state of fear, sure enough, my sleep is much more disturbed, not even by quantity of time spent in bed, but quality of that time, right? And naturally, of course, then the quantity goes down with time because we're like, well, I don't want to just lay around here. Let me go be productive. Let me go do something, right? Or let me turn on the TV while I'm trying to fall asleep, thinking I'm helping myself, but I'm not. And once again, slowly but surely, less and less time is given to it. More, it gets worse and worse over time. And whoever said that it's the greatest solution, it really is. But at the same time, sleep is not our sleep quality is still a symptom. It still goes deeper than that.
Mm-hmm.
Folks, do your research on one hormone. This is the biggest issue I think in society, and it's cortisol. Cortisol is a stress response hormone that has an inverse relationship with melatonin, which is a sleep hormone. And because cortisol is up all the time, our body never kicks in that recovery hormone to help us go to sleep and let our mind rest. And that's what it all connects to. And there's so many causes for it.
Okay, good information. That's why right now it's very popular to take melatonin as a supplement to help sleep. And that could be helpful, but ideally, we need to figure out the sources that are affecting our sleep outside of maybe outside of physiological, the mental and emotional and spiritual elements. And I like Richard's comment. He says, sleep, the ultimate compensatory strategy. I like that. And then Zaid says that we're living a life of total unbalance in all aspects. Such a true statement, Zaid, that we are not dealing with alignment, congruence in our total life in terms of body, soul, and spirit, and it's taking a toll. And that's why one of the things that Anton and I and those of us Perspective Force really push to address those unbalances or imbalances so that we begin to be able to uh, get our systems functioning the way they are designed to.
Show
Zaid,
Zaid's next comment. His yeah, that one right
yeah,
there.
yeah. Zaid
It's
says all stems from our work conditions, and it goes into other aspects of our lives, from the constant bombardment of news, eating junk food, sugar consumption, etc., contribute to the chemical imbalance in our bodies, including our brains, which contributed to these psychological symptoms as well. Very, very true. Go ahead, Anton. I know that hits a
and,
hot
and,
button for
and
you.
that's the illustration of the vicious cycle, right? We have poor work conditions that makes us be stressed out. But I also want to point out that it's, for some it may be work conditions, for some it may be life conditions, relationship at home, it could be their health, lots of different things that are causing this cortisol to spike, right? Causing us not to sleep as well. So what does that do in turn? Because of poor cortisol regulation, then we wake up, we're more irritable, because when we don't sleep well, that's what our body starts doing. Being in that constant go, our body starts to get hangry a lot more often. Our body starts to have a lot shorter fuse. What does that do? Cause a further decline with our relationships, or it causes our productivity to go up at work because we can't focus. So now it causes our work problems to become worse, or it causes our insulin to not be regulated as well. So now our sugar cravings go up and we eat more sugar, which once again creates more cortisol, creates more sleep problems. And before you know it, we're depressed, we're anxious, and that's what's happened in our society. Take a look at statistics on depression and anxiety over the last 25 years. Astronomical spikes, exponential spikes. And we're not addressing the root cause. Everybody's like, well, we need to talk about people's feelings. I get it, folks. Don't get me wrong. Feelings are important, but it's not solving the problem. We've started talking about feelings since 2000s, but the problem's getting worse because it's a chemical response. That's first and foremost. So we have to help people talk about their feelings, but at the same time, stop some of these cycles from occurring.
Yeah, and I have to do a little commercial here. We at Perspective Force created an assessment, and it identifies, we call it stress areas, but I think if you use this or expose yourself to this assessment, I think it will also help reveal fears that we're living with ongoing. Because again, fear, stress, anxiety are all interrelated. And taking this assessment will help avoid treating symptoms, but rather begin to dig down and find the root causes of some of these things we're dealing with. And so it's free on our website. And so go take it. You're the only people going to see your emails are Anton and I, and we only sell them to our closest friends. No, I'm just kidding. We don't sell them to anybody, and we're not going to spam you and all that. The primary reason we like that is we like to reach out and offer an opportunity to get, if you will, interpretation on some of your results. So, and it's just an offer, it's not a push. And Rick makes a good comment that sometimes sleep's affected physiologically, and getting help with those is something that's a good idea. He even shares openly that he deals with his using a CPAP device, and having known some people that have used those, I know they can be quite a game changer for us if we take advantage of it. And let's see. Okay, I got to see who makes this comment because we're net. situation where we got
Richard's asking a question about what about a chemical alternative? Richard, can you clarify what you mean by that? If you can type in the comments, keep going, Kev. Sorry.
And then Richard also talks about lack of daylight and a lack of vitamin D. That again, see, part of our design, my opinion, I've got lots of them, and but at the end of the day, having time outside, away from the stimulation of city and things like that, can be such a benefit. And part of that's because it forces us outside where we get sunlight and we get fresher air and so on. Something that I would encourage anyone to consider making part of their routine. And then Richard comments that sugar's the king of nasties. And then this is what Anton was talking about. What about a chemical alternative medication? Anton, I would take that. Let's see. I don't know if Richard's responded yet. The question in my mind that Richard's asking is chemical alternatives a good idea? Are there valid ones, or are we better to avoid them? Your thoughts?
If he's saying chemical alternative to a stressor to our body, perhaps. I mean, I am one that's really, you should ask everybody in my life, they make fun of me. I don't really put medications in my body very often unless I'm very, very ill. I believe in my body's natural immunity and fighting most things off, and my immunity is pretty darn good. But our society is over medicated by so much. And all these medications are chemicals that our body are foreign to our body. They create some long-term side effects that we don't even realize. And I'm not sure if that's where you're going, but medications are the chemical alternative of sugar. They're damaging, they're bad to our body, but people keep using them because they're like, oh, I feel better for a little bit. But we're not looking at long-term impact of it and how gradually we're just getting worse and worse. And I'm not sure if that's the angle he took or not.
Well, and he went on to clarify that he was speaking about medications, and medications have value. For example, if you are in pain because of something going on, and you are can dull the pain by taking pain killer temporarily, but as part of that, you're taking other steps. An example: I've had a family member have a frozen shoulder, and ultimately, what had to happen is they had to receive a shot in the shoulder joint long enough to dull the pain so that they could then do exercises and physical therapies that resolved the bigger problem. And once they did, then the pain medication was not needed. And so there is a place for it, but most medications, if you look into them, are treating symptoms. They're not treating causes. And that's where the problem comes in, is we don't find out what are the root causes, and we just keep treating symptoms. And by the way, that's what we do with stress, because that's how we've been trained to do things, is to treat those symptoms. And my apologies, I missed an earlier comment from Shona. Thanks for sharing a comment, Shona. Is I've seen many with sleep trackers who become obsessed by them. Oh yeah, there are a lot of good tools out there that people get overwrought over and become out of balance with them. No doubt about it.
Richard clarified it, and I want to jump on that one and tie it back to your point. So pull up his last comment about depressed folks and medication.
You're talking about this one?
Yep. So Richard, you're spot on, right? So here's the thing about what these medications are. Most of them are SSRIs, which basically what they do in the brain is they take a lot of these chemicals that are needed for, not feeling depressed and not feeling anxious, and they put more of them specifically in the synapse gap between, where the neurons connect, and it makes the body feel like there is more of that substance in the brain. The problem is it's a short-term solution. Then the body kind of figures it out and goes, no, I don't actually have that. Or we start to blunt these receptors even further, needing more and more of those chemicals in order to create the same response. So tying it back to what Kev said, I'm not anti-medication. I'm also supplements. It's the same principle. We need to use them for a short-term period of time, right? Maybe somebody is so depressed, can't exercise. People are like, well, just start exercising. It's that simple. Yes, exercise will absolutely help with depression. But anybody that's ever suffered with anxiety and depression or on a clinical state knows how hard it is sometimes to even leave the house, how hard it is to, do anything whatsoever besides be glued to the couch or whatever the equivalent may be. So maybe the medication starts them on that path, but life changes have to occur. It's coming back to what Kevin was talking about, the root cause of the pain, the root cause of the anxiety, the root cause of depression has to be addressed once we were able to, start to get that kickstart for medication, because ultimately the medication is going to stop working if we don't start changing the lifestyle.
Let's see. Zaid shares that he uses fish oil capsule at night. And so that's another potential supplement. And then Shauna makes a comment that I think is a very astute one. It says, make sure you leave your phone behind, plus stop using your phone before bed, proven to disrupt sleep if used before sleep. So yeah, electronic devices can be a factor in our sleep and affect how or disturb how we sleep or do not sleep. And I want to share a comment that Rick shares, because I know, again, it's could come across that we're against medications. And he says he takes meds to sleep, have for years. If I didn't, would never sleep. There are times where there are physiologic reasons in our body that cause us to have to consider long-term use of medication. Now, and so not trying to guilt anybody on things, but what I would do is find out whatever it is that you're taking and see if there are some more homeopathic approaches that might help you not have to take them. Don't know. And again, we're not trying to guilt anybody over use of medication, because they have value and have a place. But ideally, our body is designed to fight off diseases, to recover from injury and things like that. And it may be that especially a physical injury, like I broke my arm a few years ago. Well, my arm is never going to function in the same fashion as it did before, but I've learned to adjust and adapt in such a way to be able to live with it, so that I avoid taking medications related to it. I'm sure I could get some and take those, but I choose to rather overcome in other ways.
Okay, we gotta wrap up, but I just want to leave folks with this. I think we need to get into sleep. Maybe let's do that next week, and I'll prep some slides. Normally we just kind of talk and stuff like that, but I'll prep some slides to show you folks some of the things that I'm talking about with sleep. And Richard, I hope you tune in too. I've dealt with this stuff so many times, and I've had these conversations so many times where it's like people are like, I need my Valiums, I need my different medication aids to sleep. And with time, we were able to get them off because they understood what the bigger picture was. And, I would say 9 out of 10 people, not everybody, you could be that 1 out of 10, but I think next week I want to spend more time specifically on sleep.
And to Richard's comment about clinically depressed and chronically stressed, yeah, again, there are exceptional cases and no doubt, but I think that learning more about what's going on in us, and this is part of the reason we've talked about this today, is the more we understand what's behind and we become our own expert, if you will, to a point, not relying strictly on medicine and the medical community, we have a fighting chance. So anyway, thanks everyone for being with us this week. And we'll be back next week. And so we'll dig deeper into the ins and outs and ups and downs of sleep. And maybe we can find some good options to consider how to address our sleep. Anton, closing thought?
No, folks, just honestly pay attention to how much fear is around you and try to try to notice what it does to you. Because when we identify those symptoms, we start to and look for causes and where it's coming from and address it as much as you can, because fear is very destructive in our lives.
Well, and I hope I'm not beating. Oh, I lost Anton. Bottom line is, folks, one way to help with the fear is to evaluate our inputs and, frankly, turn off the TV, put down the newspaper, turn off the radio, and allow yourself to recover a bit. So thank you, everyone, and look forward to seeing you next week, 8 o'clock on Tuesday morning. And we will dig further into practical ways and maybe non-medication ways to improve our sleep. And hopefully that can lay a good groundwork for ourselves. So God bless everyone. Take care. And we'll get to see Anton in person next week, I suspect. So thanks. We will talk to you later and see you next Tuesday. Bye.